But first I want to say Happy Halloween, Happy All Hallows Eve, and I don't know if we say happy, but I want to celebrate or recognize Dia de los Muertos. I went yesterday out to Old Mesilla, and it was so touching to see all of the remembrances of those who have gone before us. And when we talk about a cup that runneth over, it really is all those people in our past who have helped to fill that cup, who have given us things that allow us to have a place in our life today where we can say our cup runneth over. So I do want to recognize anyone who is remembering this weekend, somebody in their life who helped to fill up their life and now is not here in the present body form. So what is it then that makes us feel abundant enough in our life to be able to say, my cup runneth over? Well, first of all, I know it is when we have a full storehouse, when we have all that we need already there for us, or when the cup is full. That's kind of obvious, right? That's when we can say it's starting to overflow and run over. And in the month of November, traditionally throughout most of history, communities have started doing the harvest. We can see around Las Cruces, the chilies being harvested, the onions are out of the fields, the cotton is being harvested. This is the season for harvest. When we prepare for the winter, when we put things aside, when we put things into storage, some people are getting to can the stuff that's in their gardens and put it up so that they can use it later. Some people who get to go to the store all the time might be looking at another kind of surplus that they might have, and they're looking for places to donate so that they don't pay as many taxes. That's another form of surplus, and putting things where we want it, putting things away, or looking at how to invest. Basically, at this time of year, we're just looking at that abundance, that overflow, that harvest, and looking at how it is we can give thanks for that as well. So why do we harvest and why do we store things away if in our lives it is true what Cheryl read in that reading? At the end of the reading it says, it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So if that's true, why do we need to store things or put things aside for the winter? Well, I know that phrase might not be one that everyone relates to today, but I want to look at that phrase metaphysically, because a lot of our metaphysical teachers refer to that sentence that is in the Hebrew scriptures. It is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Edwin Gaines, Ernest Holmes, and Joel Goldsmith, among others, refer to that, and they use it often when they're talking. So why then do we need to store stuff? Why do we need to put things aside? Well, let's look at that meaning, first of all. And according to Charles Fillmore, who was one of the founders of Unity, the word harvest actually means the Christ consciousness, or that consciousness that we have of the Christhood, or what it means to be of the Christ. And as we gain that Christ consciousness, we gain awareness and knowing and an understanding that relieves us of sin, sickness, poverty, and death. That's his definition. Now, of course, the definition for sin is different than many of us grew up with. We look at, again, metaphysically, but it's also a truer translation of the word that was used there. That means that we've missed the mark, that we're not necessarily hitting the mark of our divine potential. So if we think about it as God or Spirit's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, then we're looking at being given that consciousness, that awareness that allows us to be free of sin, sickness, poverty, or death. Well, that's a pretty good definition right there, I think, but I also wanted to go to the dictionary to see what the word kingdom actually means in the dictionary. We think we know sometimes what something is, and then I'm always surprised. And the second definition under kingdom in the dictionary is anything conceived of as constituting a realm or sphere of independent action and control. So anything conceived of constituting the realm or sphere of independent action and control. So if we take both of those meanings and apply it to that original sentence, that it is the Father's or God's or Spirit's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, we're given the awareness, the consciousness of all that is, and we're also given the freedom, the sphere, the independence, and the control to make use of it. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. So how do we then feel that abundance? How do we get to that place of feeling that overflow? Well, like I said, it's when there's no lack, or when we're experiencing then that allness of God that was also talked about in the Joel Goldsmith reading. Now, when you think about it, if we go back to what we teach here in terms of treatment, that's the first 2 steps of treatment. Recognizing the allness of God, what God is, that everything that is around and in and through us, and our unification with it. Not just like it's there and we're here and we come together, but the fact that we are that expression here on this planet. That everything that we conceive of that God is, has, or does, we also have in that consciousness the ability to be, have, or do, which means that we create that allness in our life. So as we think about the kind of God that we recognize that serves us, do we want the kind of God that doles things out to us based on its decision about whether we're worthy or not? Or do we want the kind of God that is the allness, the goodness that is all around us? Now, I know that's a lot of words, and I'm already seeing, though, some recognition of the preference for that God that is the allness. But as I was contemplating those words of Joel Goldsmith, I thought, I always need a metaphor. What's a good metaphor to help explain what this is that Joel Goldsmith is talking about? And what came to me is this Chinese proverb, which I'm sure most of you have heard. Give a person a fish, and they eat for a day. Teach a person to fish, and they feed themselves for a lifetime. And I realize that when we go to God, when we approach God in treatment or in prayer, asking for that handout, asking God to give us something that's outside of ourselves, that's like asking for a fish for a day. When we recognize that consciousness, that allness of God that moves in and through us, that's when we realize that we fish. We know how to fish. That's the good news, is that we already do know how to fish. Ernest Holmes said, God does for us what it does through us. So essentially you can picture that God is fishing for your good right through you, that you already know and have what it is that you need to do that. If all God did was give us handouts, that would leave us beggars and needy our whole life. But we're given the opportunity to learn how it is to do our own fishing. Now, I'm aware that when somebody's hungry, if somebody's starving in any form, now I'm not just talking physically, but if they're physically hungry, but if you're starving on any level, spiritually or emotionally, it's hard to teach someone to fish when they're hungry. It's hard to even want to go fishing if you're hungry. So in the beginning, we are fed. As babies, when we're little, we are fed. We are given the nurturing that we need. And so sometimes we might do a treatment and we're asking for something and it shows up and we get fed in that way. So that handout kind of worked. It made us feel recognized, acknowledged, secure, taken care of. But when you think about that handout relationship, there's still a sense of separation. There's me down here, lowly, needy, hungry, maybe even still feeling like a victim. And there's you, God, out there, sort of lofty, opulent, serving me and meeting all of my needs. Well, that can work for a while. But what Joel Goldsmith and Ernest Holmes and Edwene Gaines and all of our teachers are trying to explain to us is that we can do this for ourselves. And they often refer to Jesus as the master teacher or the way shower. And if you think about the way that Jesus taught in the stories of the Christian scriptures, he fed everybody, physically fed everybody first, even through that multiplying of the fish and the loaves. Everybody got to fill their tummies before he tried to explain to them how to fill their spirits and their souls. He took care of that need to be fed and then taught them how to feed themselves. So like I said, it's difficult to teach someone to fish if they're hungry, because fishing requires patience, it requires focus, it requires that intention, it requires prepping for the catch, being ready to receive, that expectancy, and it often requires solitude and quiet Now, I know there's all different ways to fish, but a lot of times when we think about going fishing, we think about taking that time in solitude and quiet and just focusing, testing out the waters, whatever we need to do. So like I said, the good news is we already know how to fish. And I realize that the way we know how to fish is a lot like the way a baby knows how to walk. If you think about it, we don't teach a baby how to stand. We don't teach a baby how to tell its brain to make those muscles do what it needs to do, to put their foot down just right. We don't teach the baby how to take the brain and figure out with the middle ear where the balancing process is. We provide support and encouragement. We might take their hands and help them get going, but we're not actually teaching them to walk. We're encouraging them to do what their body is already wanting to do. And of course, that's assuming that that body is healthy and ready to move in that way. I realize that not all of us are born with that ability, and so we compensate in other ways. But essentially, we don't teach the body how to do that. We support and we encourage. And likewise, when we talk about fishing in that sense of how it is that we bring about our goodness, our allness, we already know how. It's already part of what we can do, what we already know how to do for ourselves. And yet sometimes it's nice to run into somebody who's been doing it a little longer, who might be able to encourage us, might be able to take our hand, get us steady on our feet, might be able to feed us while we're learning that process, remembering what it is we know how to do, reconnecting us with that allness that is the Spirit that is God within us. And once we get the hang of it, once we get our balance, once we start walking and moving forward, we can then start filling the storehouse. We can start collecting the harvest. We can freeze the fish, dry it, whatever you want to do with it, can the food, start putting food away. So why this harvest part? Why the storage? Again, if we are being given the kingdom, doesn't that mean that we get what we want every day? Isn't it going to show up every day if that's what we really believe? So why do we need to harvest? Is harvesting till it overflows really being greedy? Is harvesting and putting things aside not trusting in God or Spirit to provide? Is that really, assuming that we're going to be in a situation of need at some point? What if you don't feel like going fishing tomorrow? I'm just kidding. I think there are really two good reasons why we harvest, why we put things away in storage. One of them could be, we want a day of rest, and that is one of the reasons. If you think about the way nature works, things move in cycles. And instead of thinking of winter as a time of lack, think of it as a time of rest. The earth is resting. We are intended to rest. If you think about what happens in your body when you exercise, your muscles have to rest in order to work again, in order to stay strong. If you don't give yourself time for rest, you're not functioning in the way that nature intended. And one of the things that Ernest Holmes says is you cannot beat nature at its own game, for we are some part of the game she is playing. And he often encourages us to look to nature for ways to see how it is that God is working and moving in and through us. And so what he's saying here in the Science of Mind textbook is very similar to what Joel Goldsmith said in the reading earlier. Spiritual wisdom says that God manifests through everything and is incarnated in all of us, that all is divinity, and that nature herself is the body of God. The mechanical laws of nature are set and immutable. But the spontaneous recognition of these laws gives us the power to bring them into practical use in everyday life and experience. Here we have a dual unity. I thought that was an interesting combination of words. A dual unity of law and order, spontaneous choice, volition, conscious action, and automatic reaction. The laws of the universe are to be trusted, but we must come to understand them before we can use them. Once understood, any law is available and is impersonally responsive to each and all alike. Essentially, it works through everyone once we get it, once we understand how it is that the law is working. And so if you look to nature for how it is it has these cycles, then it makes sense that we want to store up for those periods of rest, for those periods of non-productivity. And so I know it might seem a little strange that we are sponsoring a financial workshop here next Saturday. But this is in keeping, I think, with the teachings of prosperity and the class that we've been doing on enriching your life, but this is open, to everybody. Because as we think about the winters in our life, which we could consider maybe retirement is like that time. That time technically we're supposed to be able to rest and enjoy life. We want to have a storehouse there to call on. It's okay to put away for those times and to be prepared in the tangible for the physical. And the second reason you want to store things up has to do with the storehouse of our emotional or our spiritual storehouse. So I have a story I want to share with you out of Greg Bear's Real Love, and I highly encourage this book to everyone if you haven't read it. He is a great presenter as well. I've wanted to get him here, so we'll maybe keep trying. But in this story, he's talking about the effect of real love in our lives, and to him, real love is unconditional love. It's feeling that presence of God love, but unconditional love. And his mission is to go out and teach people how to fill up on unconditional love, how to have that experience, how to give it and how to receive it. He says, as we feel unconditionally loved, we lose our emptiness and fear, and then we no longer have a need for getting and protecting behaviors. And he explains what getting and protecting behaviors are a lot more throughout the book, but he summarizes some of them here. He says, when we stop lying, being angry, attacking people, acting like victims, or running, our relationships can only become more loving and rewarding. Let me illustrate how real love affects our lives simply by eliminating our anger. And then he refers to real love as like money in the bank. Imagine that you're down to your last $2 and you're hungry. Your last two, just to picture this. Your last $2 and you're hungry. And then you put your money on the table as you get ready to go out, get your purse, put your coat on, whatever. You're getting ready to go out. And I suddenly run in the room, snag those $2 and run off, and you can't catch me with them. How do you feel? I just took your last $2 to get that bread, and you're hungry. Is anybody angry with me? Okay. I want to make sure you're with me. He said, you'd most certainly be angry at me. So now imagine that I do exactly the same thing. I come in and steal those $2 from you, but this time you know that you have $20 million in the bank. So imagine you have $20 million. Can you even picture that? $20 million in the bank, and I come and take that $2 off your table. Are you still that angry with me? No. The loss of $2 matters very little when you have $20 million. That's how it feels to have sufficient real love. That's how it feels to be full, to have our storehouse full, our cup overflowing. And then when people are inconsiderate, when they fail to do what we want, and even when they attack us, they're only taking $2 and we can easily do without it. When we feel unconditionally loved, everything else becomes relatively insignificant. People don't make us angry anymore. Heavy traffic, for example, becomes a tiny nuisance and not something that makes us angry or unhappy as it once did. When people speak badly of us, we're not threatened. We understand that they're simply afraid and protecting themselves. The wounds of the past begin to heal and no longer cast their terrible shadow over everything that we do in the present. So to me, that's the second good reason to fill up our storehouse. Because the more we have in that storehouse, the less of an impact it is if somebody tries to take something from us. Now, taking something doesn't always mean they're just literally stealing it from you, but maybe they're taking something emotionally or spiritually. Something happens and it feels like you're being taken from. Maybe you get a bill that you weren't expecting. Something shows up that it doesn't feel that good. And the fuller we are on all levels, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, the fuller we are, the less of an impact that little bit of taking something from us is going to feel. And when that happens, then we have less anger. We do less of our own getting and protecting behaviors. And I think we increase world peace because the more at peace we are, the more at peace the world is. So as you can see, our cup, the coffers, the storehouse, whatever you want to call it, can be filled and is filled with all kinds of things, from food to money, love, joy, the abundance of all our good. What do we call all of that? God qualities. Essentially, we're back where we started. It's all God. It's all God, and it's all there. It's already full. So is it greedy to keep your storehouse full to overflowing? I don't think so. Now, that isn't to judge those who are right now starving on some level, whether it's emotionally, physically, whether they need a handout or a hand up right now. That's why we have community. That's why we're all here, to help each other out when those times come. And once people are fed, then we can start teaching and reminding that they already know how to fish. They already know how it is that they can fill up those coffers on their own. So I want us to remember that whatever our cup is running over with, whatever we're already full of and we can recognize it and experience it right now, whatever that is, if it's emotional fullness, if we already feel full of that unconditional love, of joy, of that spirit of peace, or if it's abundance on a physical level, if we know that we are well cared for, our bank account is full, we have all the food that we need, we have the home that we need, if we're experiencing our health, we all need to remember that our cup does not run over because we're lucky, because we're special, because we know how to pray better, or because some benevolent God out there handed us a fish for the day. Our cup runneth over, our storehouse is full, because we have been given the kingdom. We have been given that consciousness, that awareness of our oneness with all that is, the allness of God, in and through, moving through us, fishing through us, so to speak, allowing us that independent action and that choice or that control of how to make use of it. Our cup does run over because God fishes through us. So, do I want a fish, a handout? No, I'd rather be fishing. How about you? Anybody want to join me? So it is.